Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And this message is specifically for Sunday, July 17th, 2022, but you can listen to it anytime you wish. And we're in a series that has to do with the book of Genesis. And we started it, of course, in Genesis 1. And you can find those previous messages on YouTube or Facebook. And we are looking at the line of Seth and Cain as they are compared or contrasted, however you want to look at that. And Cain, as you know, had killed his brother. They had brought offerings to God, Cain and Abel, ostensibly at different times. And God would give them immediate feedback as to the acceptability of their offering or not. And it had something to do with their offering and their personhood. There was an attitudinal aspect, obedience aspect involved in the type of offering that they would give, I believe. And Abel gave an acceptable offering right down the line the way it should be. It was a blood sacrifice that was talked about even thousands and thousands of years later as to its appropriateness in the book of Hebrews. Cain, on the other hand, presented an offering that was not accepted, and ostensibly there was a number of things wrong with it, and Cain had to be careful because sin was crouching at his door. Well, Cain told Abel about the acceptability of his offering over against Abel's offering, and Abel probably said some things about, well, you should have done what God told you, or of course God wouldn't have accepted it because it didn't have a blood aspect to it, pointing to our sin and various such things. It might have been something like that. This is all somewhat conjecture. But Cain couldn't stand that. And he was a hothead of sorts. Maybe he just struck his brother and he fell against a rock, hit his head, and died, or he just fully intended to just beat his brother up and he died. But nevertheless, Cain didn't want to own up to what he had done. Am I my brother's keeper? I don't know where he is. Well, he knew full well where he was, but he wasn't willing to repent. And so God put a punishment upon him that he would not be able to make a living off of the ground anymore. No matter where he went, he couldn't make a living off of the ground. And he was a farmer, so this was quite the blow. And so we pick up the narrative in Genesis chapter 4 and verse 16 with verse 16. Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Well, we don't know exactly where Nod is. It's not so much a city as perhaps it was an area. It was east of Eden. Once again, we don't exactly know where Eden was. We know that there was rivers in Eden, the Tigris and Euphrates, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it was located in the Mesopotamia area anyway. It's just that they liked those names and they perpetuated them. Just because somebody calls a city in the United States Eden doesn't mean that that's where the Garden of Eden was at one time located. It's just we use these names over. So Nod was a land, and the thing that's troubling to me is the statement that Cain went out from the presence of the Lord. Does this imply that Cain turned his back on God's influence in this life? You know, having the presence of the Lord in your life, it was considered to be a great blessing. And Matter of fact, in the tabernacle, they have something called the bread of presence. And so, being in the presence of the Lord, having the tabernacle in the midst of the people of Israel was considered a great blessing. Um, the presence of the Lord is a tremendous blessing. And when you go away from the presence of the Lord, that is a downward spiral. I know people who were raised in the church, and as they were raised in the church, they get out on their own and they basically never come back to church. They are absenting themselves, in a sense, from the presence of the Lord. They don't want that influence in their life anymore. And so here is Cain, and he goes from the presence of the Lord. Um, my friends, whenever you think about moving to a different area, you ought to consider if the area you're moving to has a good church. You don't assume, I'm going to this area and I'll just find whatever church I can find. You ought to have some idea of some good churches in the area. There are areas that don't have good churches. And unless you're the type of person that likes to start churches and start with yourself and build people around you, you are putting yourself in a scary position to be from the presence of the Lord. Well, so Cain, if he wanted to just escape the reminders um, of the negative things that happened, that's one thing, as long as he wanted to still bridge over toward the Lord, but he didn't. And at the very least, he is escaping the reminders of his failures, but he's not really bridging back to the Lord. Nothing indicates his line turns toward the Lord. No one from his line. Isn't that interesting? You as a parent could be going someplace and you decide, well, maybe someday I'll get into church and I'll take my children. And then it just gets too easy to sleep in or not be involved. And you don't take your children. And then they grow up and they have children and they don't take them to church. And your whole line becomes basically a godless line. So, my friends, you have to be very careful about these things. Cain wants a new beginning. It says in verse 17, Cain had relations with his wife, and she conceived. Well, some people say, where did he get his wife? I'm so tired of that. That's not any argument. There were girls that were born to Adam and Eve. They just mentioned these two boys, Cain and Abel. And he married his sister. That was all there was. Later on, when people started having children that had all kinds of recessive bad traits indicated there, I believe God said, don't marry like that anymore. Now, Abraham had married his half sister. But 400 years later, when they came out of the land of Israel and Egypt, and they set up the Ten Commandments and stuff, and one of the things was forbidding of marrying your close relative. But at the time, that was all there was when Adam and Eve were the first couple, and the genetic pool was so very, very pure, and we didn't have the problems that are attached to our inbreeding as we did back then. So it's not really an issue. He married a sister, and probably he married her before he got the mark put upon him, because chances are, if he had the mark on him, nobody would want to have married him. So Cain had relations with his wife after he went to the place of Nod, and she conceived and gave birth to Enoch. And he built a city and called the name of the city Enoch after the name of his son. Now, the word Enoch means new beginnings or initiation or starting out. And so he saw this city as a way to kind of mitigate against being from the presence of the Lord, something to rally around, something to gain some type of protection. Um, you know, we talk about God's protection, and the psalmist said, "A thousand shall fall to my right side, and 10,000 to my left, and nothing shall come near me." And God's protection, we have the armor of God, which basically is putting on Jesus Christ. That doesn't mean we need to be foolish and go sleep in a sleeping bag on I-96. But nevertheless, God does give us protection. And so he was relying not so much on God, but upon his fortification. Um, you have to wonder sometimes, people that want to live in these cities, they think they're safer, when we in the country know that they're not. We're the ones that live in the country and don't lock our doors, and we can let our children run around. But the people in the city, they're the ones that are locked inside, and they have to be concerned about bullets flying and everything like that. So cities are not all what they're cracked up to be, but nevertheless, you want to be safe in a city, and there was a certain aspect in which there was safety back at that time. And so he had this new beginning built around this city. Now to Enoch was born Irad, and Irad became the father of Mehujael, and Mehujael became the father of Methushael, and Methushael became the father of Lamech. Now, some of these names are similar to the names in the line of Seth, but that doesn't mean that somehow or another they aren't two different lines. And, I looked online one time trying to find my name online, Russell Simpson. I thought, what's the chances of there being that many Russell Simpsons? Well, there's quite a few of them. And matter of fact, when I went to New Albany, Indiana, somebody was getting my mail named Russell Simpson. He was Russell P. Simpson, and I was Russell E. Simpson. So I thought I better go know him. He might even be a relative, and so I can get my mail. And I met him, and he was from Peculiar, Missouri, a believer, but he had Russell Simpson as his name. Well, just because you have similarities in names doesn't mean that necessarily you're from the same line, even. We weren't related. So there are these people who had similar names, and Lamech took to himself 2 wives. Now, this is the first mention of bigamy, let alone polygamy, and it had been up to this point that a man took 1 wife, but this man, somehow or another, got greedy and took 2, or thought he would buck the trend and take 2. And he must have thought he was some big shot guy that could have 2 wives. It gives the names of these wives as Ada and Zillah. And Ada gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. And his brother's name was Jubal, Jabal and Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and the harp. As for Zillah, she gave birth to Tubal-Cain, the forger of all implements of bronze and iron, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Well, now, my friends, Cain's offspring developed specializations to make a living apart from farming. How are you going to get along if the ground that you have anything to do with is cursed? We don't know how far down the line the curse on Cain goes, but it could have very well been that it extended to his relatives as well. And so they had to develop specializations. Jabal developed a nomadic tent-dwelling herdsmanship. He'd have a portable tent, and he would have animals, and they would eat up the grass. So he'd pull up his tent, move his animals, and they'd go to another place where there's grass. And he developed a lifestyle of this, a sustainable lifestyle. And so he became the father of those who dwell in tents and move their herds around to handle the grass. So he was the father of that. That was his idea. He developed that. Then there was another man named Jubal, and he developed musicianship. And he was good at, I think, it mentions two instruments, the lyre and the pipe. And that doesn't mean that it was only two instruments. It could be the variations of those as well. You know, you have a saxophone, and then you have a little saxophone, and a bigger saxophone, and a really big saxophone. You have violin, but then you have a viola, then you have a cello, and you have a bass. Just because you have one particular instrument doesn't mean you can't have variations of them. So he had this ability for music. And, you know, there are people to this day that seem to have a knack for music. They can sit down and play by ear on the piano, and they're good with instruments that have strings, or they can blow into a horn and make some pretty good sounds. And so this was developed back at that time. Of course, you know, the flood came, but that doesn't mean that the knowledge of playing instruments and the knowledge of uh, having tents, living in tents and following herds, and then the knowledge of metallurgy didn't follow on throughout that pinch point in Noah's sons. After all, they were building an ark, and they probably needed some nails, and probably needed, they had developed the ways of music and metallurgy, and perhaps they lived in tents or could make tents and cloth and things like that. It also goes to show that the people back at the time of Adam weren't stupid. They weren't Neanderthals. They weren't people that couldn't think. They were people that could make a living off of other things. And so Tubal Cain, the forger of all implements of bronze and iron, and so they made those instruments, hoes and door hinges on nails, and when men turned violent, they made weapons like swords and knives and spears and things like that as well. So Cain's generation, grandsons, fifth generation grandsons, were able to uh, specialize and to make a living apart from farming. Cain's fifth generation grandson Lamech, who fathered these three sons that talked about their music and their farming, not their farming, but their tent, following herds, and then also their metallurgy. This fifth generation grandson Lamech demonstrates Cain's rebellion in multiple ways. Lamech steps away from the one man, one woman view and takes on two wives, Ada and Zillah. And he thinks himself quite a deal. Matter of fact, he wrote a little song about it. Here in verse 23, Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah. See, that was big deal for him. He thought he was something because he had two wives. Ada and Zillah, listen to my voice. You wives of Lamech. Now, this is Hebrew poetry, and so there's a repetition. Ada and Zillah are mentioned. You wives of Lamech is mentioned in their parallel. Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, listen to my voice. Give heed to my speech. There's a parallel there. For I have killed a man for wounding me. See, I'm just a chip off the old block. I am more potent, and I am cut out of the same cloth as my father Cain. And a boy for striking me. Oh, there's something to brag about. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. I'm greater than my father. And in some ways, he takes his father's mistakes and he multiplies them. He goes farther away from God. He sets himself up as his own God, so to speak. And so it doesn't look like the line of Cain is going so well. Of course, the line of Cain keeps developing and developing. And pretty soon, God, some years later, hundreds of years later, decides, I've just got to start all over. Noah, build me an ark. Now, in verse 25, Adam has relations with his wife again. Now, that doesn't mean that Adam waited all these years for 5, 6 generations of Cain to happen before he knew his wife again and had a son. No, don't understand it that way. Understand that maybe even very quickly after he had this altercation with Cain and Abel, he had Seth. But it could be there were other sons in between and certainly other daughters in between. But all of a sudden there was one particular son that somehow or another set himself apart, and Eve understood and said something about this. Adam had relations with his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth. Isn't it interesting? She gets to name him Seth. For she said, God has appointed me another offspring in place of Abel, for Cain killed him. So, of course, this was after Cain was killing of Abel. To Seth, to him also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. Now, isn't that interesting? Cain called his son Enoch, and Seth called his son Enosh. That's just how it was. And then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. So we're going to unpack this now. Eve sees this son as appointed by God to take the place of Abel. I wouldn't technically say it's a resurrection. No, I'm not. But it just kind of, well, this will take the place of my son Seth, or my son Abel. You see, Abel was sufficiently godly that his offering was accepted by God, and Seth became the line of the Messiah. If I take you to Luke chapter 3, there are 2 genealogies of Jesus Christ. One is his mother's side, that's how most of us understand it, and one was his father's side. And the father's side is in Matthew, where he's trying to prove the kingship of Jesus Christ. And Luke, who isn't so much into that side of things and the Jewishness, wants to point out that Jesus goes all the way back to the line of Seth, through Noah, through David, and then through Mary, and that sort of thing. And Luke chapter 3 and we're looking at verse 25. And people see this and say, oh, this isn't very interesting. This is just a bunch of names. It says in verse 23 of Luke chapter 3, when he began his ministry, Jesus himself was about 30 years of age, being, as was supposed, the son of Joseph, the son of Eli. Now that's Mary's father. The son of Mathat, the son of Levi, the son of Melchi, the son of Jannai, the son of Joseph, the son of Mattathias, the son of Amos, the son of Nahum, the son of Hesli, the son of Nagai, the son of Maath, the son of Mattathias, the son of Simeon, the son of Josech, the son of Joda. This is when you get somebody else to read a scripture reading for you. The son of Jonan, the son of Reza, the son of Zerubbabel. Oh, Zerubbabel. Now I know that name. So there was this pinch point where the son of Zerubbabel, he was the one that came back. He was of the royal line. He came back to Jerusalem. And then he had children. And one side of that was the royal line. And one side of it was just maybe a prince, but not royal, you see. Now going back behind that, the son of Shittiel, the son of Neri, the son of Melchi, the son of Adai, the son of Kosim, the son of Elmadam, the son of the son of Joshua, the son of Eleazar, the son of Joram, the son of Mattat, the son of Levi, the son of Simeon, the son of Judah, the son of Joseph, the son of Janam, the son of Eliakim, the son of Mela, blah, 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 blah. Then you get to the son of David. I know David, so I could connect Zerubbabel, then to David, and the son of Jesse. Okay, the son of Obed, the son of Boaz, the son of Zalman, and then you got all these sons, and then you get to the son of Judah, and then you get to the son of Shem, one of the three sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the son of Noah, the son of Lamech, the son of Methuselah, the son of Enoch, the son of Jared, the son of Mahalaleel, the son of Canaan, the son of Enosh, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God. Well, you see, Luke was very much interested in the Messiah, going back through to Seth, to Adam, to the Son of God, hitting the touch points of Judah and Jesse and David, and then Zerubbabel, and then finally Jesus Christ. But you see, the line of Seth became the godly line and the line of the Messiah. So after Seth's son Enoch was born, and men began to call on the name of the Lord. Well, that's an interesting phrase. Then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. The word men is added in there, but the sense is there. Then began to call upon the name of the Lord. Men. Now, I don't know why exactly, but I've got some theories. Let me explain to you some of my theories. One of my theories is that there became a critical mass of men who wanted to gather together and worship the Lord together. Because it said, then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. You had Adam, you had Seth, and then you had Enosh. And these three men perhaps were in leadership, and there was women and other men, all relatives, that kind of started to join together and call upon the name of the Lord in mass, not just one by one, but in mass together, seeking the Lord. The positive efforts of men seeking God together is a tremendous influence. If you have one man who's out worshiping the Lord under a tree, that's one thing, admirable even. But when you have men who agree to come together and worship the Lord together, demands an organization, demands appointment, it demands a willingness to meet together, it demands a community, it demands a focus on the Lord. And so when men begin to call upon the name of the Lord, that's a very good thing. Positive effort of godly men calling upon the Lord, focusing upon Him is very powerful. The Messiah, as I pointed out, comes through the line of Seth. God organizes those who follow the Messiah later on, thousands of years later, into churches. And you know, although I'm preaching right now in my study, the same sermon I'm preaching now, I preach on Sunday mornings, and there's a group of men that come together, plus their families, their godly wives, and their children, and they come together in a country church. And you know, it's interesting. You got cornfields, you got soybeans here, and you got cornfields here, and you got wheat there, and you got cow farms, and you have swine farms, and you've got dairy farms, you've got people that raise chickens, and you just have roads that intersect, and there aren't a whole lot of businesses around. But then all of a sudden, there's a church. And you go down to another crossroads, and there's a church. And these men are taking their hard-earned money and they're putting up buildings. And the people are on Sunday morning coming together and they're worshiping God. And this is the focus of their life. They're taking a considerable amount of time and their resources, and they're pouring that into the focus of worshiping God. And my friends, it's a powerful thing, a powerful thing. So these positive efforts of these people gathered together. And you know, God, when He instituted marriage in the Garden of Eden, He had this as kind of a primer for people to understand His relationship that He would have with His church. Oh, Pastor, you're blowing smoke up my skirt here. I mean, how do you get that? I don't get that from here. What I get it from is Ephesians chapter 5, which is a commentary that goes back to the Genesis passage. In Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 25, Ephesians 5:25 says, "Husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church." So there's a parallel, a man to his wife as Christ is to the church, so that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of the water with the word. You see, men are supposed to be concerned about the purity of their wives and the purity of their home. And so here you have God, and He is sanctifying His bride by the washing of the water with the word, that He may present to Himself the church in all her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she would be holy and blameless. So husbands ought also to love their own wives as their own bodies. Then it says, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ also does the church, because we are members of His body. For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother, and shall be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Where did you hear that before? Back in Genesis chapter 1. This mystery is great, but I am speaking with reference to Christ and the church. The Lord had in mind the church and his relationship to it when he instituted marriage. And so God wants to gather people together into his church. That's his plan from the get-go. There's a lot of things that have to fall in place. And he wants people to understand what marriage is so that they can understand what his relationship to his bride, the church, is. Now, unfortunately, we will see that men who seek the Lord, especially before the flood, are in short supply. Too bad. So God decides he's going to have to start over. Evil needs to be put in check. But I want to encourage you, men and women, be the men and women who seek the Lord. Become a force for good in the community that you're in, because it is a wondrous and complementary uh, effort that you do to come together to worship the Lord.